This is the To Health With That, Naturally Healthy in No Time podcast for big health topics taken in small bites. I'm your host, naturopathic Dr. Amy Newsel, and this is Season 1, all about the MTHFR mutation. This week, I want to talk about mental bad habits. So we touched on it last week in terms of other factors that play into depression with MTHFR, but this actually plays into almost every problematic mental state out there. So depression, anxiety, intrusive thoughts, all of these are common problems for humans. So common that almost all of us will experience one or the other or both in our lifetimes. In truth, both depression and anxiety are normal and healthy reactions to life stressors, grief, and trauma, and they have their uses in terms of survival and adaptation. The problem comes, then, when they linger beyond their useful time. In modern medicine, we tend to compartmentalize and idealize situations in which we can blame problems on one concrete, measurable thing, like serotonin. Serotonin is a great thing to blame in medicine. Not only is it concrete and measurable, but we have drugs to change how it's utilized and processed, and therefore it's fixable. That's all nice and neat and tidy, and it would be perfect if this strategy actually worked, like really worked. I'm not at all suggesting that this is a bad route of treatment for depression. It's actually a pretty good one, and lots of people see improvement of the symptoms, and sometimes even resolution with a drug that affects serotonin like an SSRI. But lots of people don't, which means we have a ways to go. So what's left, a lot of times, are mental bad habits, which is also known as neuroplasticity. The factor in troubled mental health that I feel is most overlooked is the bad habit factor. Unfortunately, this is huge because there's an important survival-related brain function that prioritizes neural pathways that we use frequently. It's called neuroplasticity. Neuroplasticity is part of the way your brain learns what's important to you. The pathways between neurons that you use the most frequently get strengthened and prioritized because you use them the most frequently. They matter to you, right? So picture it like a pathway through tall grass. The first time you walk through the tall grass and weeds, you have to push through and there's weedy tangles. The plants pull at your legs and they're so close together that you feel resistance as you walk. The fifth time you walk the same path, the plants are kind of trampled in that area. There's a natural space opening up and the walking is a little bit easier. The 500th time, there's a dirt trail there where the plants have stopped growing because the path is traveled so frequently. It's clear and easy and there's no resistance at all. It is exactly the same for well-worn pathways in your brain. The more you use a certain pathway, the easier it becomes to continue to use that pathway. This principle applies to many mental states that could be considered mental bad habits: anxiety, catastrophizing, depression, negative self-talk, obsessive thoughts, intrusive thoughts, guilty or self-reproaching thoughts, lack and scarcity. It also, interestingly, applies to many mental states that can be considered good mental habits: gratitude, mindfulness, acceptance, forgiveness, self-acceptance, abundance. Now, does that mean that if you're focusing on retraining your brain, that a lifetime of depression and anxiety can disappear? Well, in all honesty, I actually think it does, but it also takes a significant amount of work, and sometimes there really are also nutritional deficiencies, physical problems, or neurotransmitter imbalances that need to be corrected as well. There are 3 techniques that I think are incredibly helpful when you're trying to break a bad habit. And the key to all of these is experimenting to see what works best for your particular bad habit and then repeating it over and over and over and over again. Mostly it boils down to practice. So here's the techniques to choose from. Number 1 is called the fantasy. Say your issue is catastrophizing or anxiety and you get into a place of what if? What if I lose my job and can't keep up with the bills? What if piano falls out of the sky? We all have these thoughts sometimes, and they're largely unproductive. This isn't when most people do their effective planning, it's just when they spin out into fear and anxiety. So here's what you do. Number 1, notice that you're spinning out. This is actually the hardest part, because if you get into this thought frequently, it often runs in the background without you placing any attention on it. Number 2, choose something awesome instead. What if I won the lottery? Here's how I would spend all that money. What if Brad Pitt came to dinner and brought Angelina Jolie with him? That's a little outdated. And then, step 3, enjoy it for a minute. Really get into the replacement fantasy. Figure out what you would do. Imagine how it would feel waking up every day knowing that you could do whatever you want. And then repeat. Every time you notice anxious thoughts, do the same thing. It takes practice. But as you do it over time, the anxious thoughts will come less frequently, and they'll feel less emotionally compelling, and they'll vanish more quickly. Technique number 2 is the stop and drop. This is my personal favorite just because it's a nice gap in a crowded mental landscape. Again, the hardest part is noticing your mind. So step 1, notice what your mind is doing. If you're doing your mental bad habit, judging yourself or feeling bad about something or obsessing, the first step is always to notice that you're doing it. That means recognizing that thought or feeling in the moment when it's occurring. Step 2, stop. Right? In that moment, stop what you're doing for a few seconds. Take a deep breath. Notice your body, your hands, your shoulders, your face, your jaw, the physical feeling that goes with that mental bad habit. Usually what I hear from people is clenched jaws, fisted hands, bunched up shoulders, clenched belly, that sort of thing. Let your body actually consciously relax. Step 3 is drop. Take another deep breath, keep your body relaxed, and let the thoughts just drop away. You don't have to stop them. It's not a forceful action. Just kind of let them peter out on their own. Let it finish. Go away. Choose not to pick it up again right away. And then, step 4, repeat. Again and again and again. This isn't quick, but it's so effective. You're literally training your brain. And just like training a dog or a horse, it's all about persistence and repetition. The last technique is the distraction. I learned this technique when my little girl was an early toddler. It applies to adult brains too. 1, notice your brain is in a bad place. Again, the first step is the hardest, but if you start to pay attention, you will start to catch yourself in places that you just don't want to be mentally. Number 2, choose a distraction. Find your own version of a toddler distraction. Something your brain likes to do that isn't a mental bad habit. Could be a book, funny YouTube video, quick game of some kind. Something that's mentally compelling enough to distract you completely from that thought. Step 3, do your distraction for 1 to 3 minutes. Set a timer, because getting lost in a distraction isn't helpful either. But your distraction is a great way to bump your brain out of an unhealthy pattern. I'm not suggesting that you binge watch Friends to stop your depression, because ultimately, that is not the point. Distracting yourself for 12 hours straight really only counts as 1 distraction. The key is to repeat at short intervals. And then, step 4 in this is repeat. Every time you notice your bad habit, give yourself a quick distraction. So I want to talk a little bit about recognizing how you're feeling in the moment, because that is actually surprisingly difficult. It's the hardest part, because at the end of the day, your mind is this wild landscape and it's not actually under much control. It mostly does its own thing and you actually kind of tune in selectively. Tuning in more often means you'll have to learn the signals that your mind gives you. A big part of this process will be noticing the trigger thoughts, feelings and body sensations, and all of those things that tell you your mind is in a dark place. Lots of what goes on in your mind stays in dark corners. It never really comes to your attention except maybe as a grinding in your stomach or tense shoulders or the sinking feeling that you've done something wrong or you'll never be good enough. All of those things start in your mind, even if you don't hear or listen to the thoughts. It's especially hard to see if you're in that state almost constantly. Just keep trying. Even if you notice twice a day, that's 2 more times than you were noticing before, right? That's a huge step forward. If you don't ever notice it, then set alarms for yourself to practice one of the above techniques randomly. Take 2 or 3 minutes out of your day as often as you can, even hourly while you're awake. It all adds up. And stopping any thought and replacing it with something either entirely neutral, like the stop and drop, or something joyful, like the fantasy, makes a difference in the tracks your brain will follow. I'd love to hear your feedback on this one. Give it a try and, leave a comment on the blog or shoot me an email, whatever seems right. But I would love to hear how you feel about this. Next week, we're going to talk a little bit more about what to actually expect when you're doing this, because it is a slow process and it's not always a direct line to improvement. A lot of times things get worse before they get better. Thanks for listening, guys. We'll see you next week.